So, I've made videos in the last month, and a couple of them I haven't bothered even to post. It's sort of been like, uh, with my cousin in Moscow said to me, "Oh, you should write a book." And I thought about it, and no one in the West. The publishing is CIA in the West, and then in Russia they're mostly liberal assholes, also anti-communist. And, basically, my, on both sides of my family, my people's history is communist in the last 100 years. They were mostly working class or oppressed people. And, so, however, October 8th, the Palestinian people, I guess led by Hamas, I guess maybe ironically enough, attacked the Zionists and, as people have said, attempted a jailbreak from Gaza, the biggest open-air prison in the world, it's been called, I believe. I, like Norman Finkelstein, I'd kind of given up on the struggle to help the Palestinians because the Zionists had been so overpowering, and the imperialists in the West, led by Washington, had been so overpowering, and people didn't really give a shit. So, however, in the last 2 years since, thank Lenin, Russia punched the West in the face, for basically 100 years of betrayal. February, I guess it was 2022 at this point, or 2021, I can't remember. I think it's 2022. Yeah. The day I got an operation for colon cancer in Leningrad, that was the day the special operation commenced. It was a real morale booster for me. At any rate, but I keep on coming back to this question because, there's so much, lying and, bullshit around it. In the Jewish question, historically in the last 100 years, it's been, used. I'm sure, everyone who's listening to me is just like, oh my God, not another Holocaust fucking, show. And, I can fully understand. I mean, I'm kind of tired. I was tired of it myself after 1980, whatever. And, my family, lived and died through that. Was exterminated on one side of the family through the genocide. I don't even call it the Holocaust. That's a Zionist term, religious term, and I'm an atheist and a communist, and I reject Zionism. And most Jews historically in the last 100 years have rejected Zionism. And which is kind of, my first point, which is, I'm so in the last week, I'm looking up all these figures, how many Jews were there? World Jewish population or European Jewish population. Well, up pops 1933 world Jewish population, 9.5 million. By 1927, and by the way, this is all going to lead back to today and the resistance of the Palestinian people. And, part of why I think the way I do. And, why heroic, figures like Norman Finkelstein think the way they do. So 1927, I wrote down just before there were 4 million Jews, I believe I wrote down, in the U.S. 4.3 million Jews in the USA in 1927. And 1927 is significant because that was the year that the imperialists in America blocked any more Jews from coming in. And why is that year significant? Well, that's 10 years after the October Revolution, the most liberatory event in human history. Fuck anyone who tells you different. I mean, 1/6 of the planet was liberated from capitalism, feudalism, and basically pogroms and tribal savagery. In that process, much like the black population of America during the Civil War, the Jews came to see, the Soviet Republic, the Red Army, the communists as their saviors, because they were, in fact, their saviors physically, from being exterminated. Their whole families being wiped out by these fucking, Ukrainian or Russian or, what have you, freaks, nationalists and fascists or reactionaries, who, couldn't organize shit because they only represented the aristocracy, the capitalists, and, the petty bourgeoisie, these idiots who had some sort of romantic idea in the clouds of nationalism, which also gets back to Zionism. They were a small minority during, this last 100 years, or prior, 1917, a little more than 100 years, let's say, from the October Revolution now. In this whole period, Zionists were a minority of the Jews. They were generally the more backward Jews or the more bourgeois Jews. Even my grandparents, they were bourgeois. They were part of the 5% probably of the Jewish people. And they rejected Zionism. My CIA liberal father, from, socialist Bund background, once said to me, if God was going to give the world an enema, he would have put the plug in the fucking Middle East. These aren't, liberals in the sense of, these virtue signaling, cancel culture, strokes today. These were people who were rooted, in the streets. And before that, the ghettos of, the Pale of the Settlement. So, they weren't going to mince words about what was what. So, they no fucks about your stupid feelings, you fucking shit libs. So, at any rate, from 1917 to 1927, the Ostjuden, the Eastern European Jews, were galvanized to the October Revolution. What? We don't have direct evidence because basically, in the end, the imperialists, the capitalists, sent the Nazis and the fascists to, exterminate the Ostjuden, the Eastern Jews. But from the time of the Soviet Republic, 2.5 million Jews walked east and, basically voted with their feet. Out of basically a population of 9.5 million, so that's basically two out of 9, 1 out of 1/4 almost, more than 20%, less than 25%, 22% of the world's Jews decided, okay, fuck the West and capitalism and pogroms and white Russian counter-revolutionaries and, Wilson and liberalism and, all of that and cultural autonomy and Zionism. We're going east, because we know the communists, A, will protect us, and B, they are the Messiah. And we're basically a messianic, fanatical, violent people, and we're going to join the communists, and we're going to fucking kill our enemies, smite our enemies, as they said in the Torah. So there was a long established tradition So the smart Jews, 22% of world Jewry, just directly was like, like me, I'm going back to Russia. I'm like, fuck you in the West, you imperialist, capitalist, liberal bastards. When we get a chance, we're gonna smite you. Eat a shit sandwich. Don't have a nice day. So, what then? And then from 1939 or prior to 39, let's say, to 45, the Soviet Union evacuated another 1.5 million Jews. So that was a total of 4 million Jews saved, by the evil communists, people like me. I've been living in Belarus and Russia, and there are Jews all over the place, and they're, not so former communists, a lot of them, that I meet. So, at least in Belarus. Or they're populist, left populist, whatever, but, they're part of that tradition. They're smarter than many Jews in the West, let's say. So, what else then? And in the U.S., so there was 4.3 million Jews by 1927. And in my own family, most of those, my great aunts and uncles, I guess they would have been, my grandfather's half-brothers and sisters, they were proletarianized. They were workers, forced into the working class. And they became communists, basically. So most of my family on that side were communists, except for my grandparents and my father. And what? So, that must have been replicated, all over, New York, Chicago, wherever the Jews were concentrated in the U.S., at that time. So probably most of world Jewry was, if not outright communist, pretty close to that, let's say. Yeah. Okay. So moving on. I don't want to make this all about, the Shoah business or any of that bullshit. I hate that. Steven Spielberg and all that, propaganda, for the imperialists, basically. A Nazi, a kind-hearted Nazi saves the Jews. That's bullshit. So, what then? Okay, so we covered that. Okay, and then getting, the connection of the past and, let's say, because I know it the best, occupied Western Soviet Belarus under the Polish occupation from 1919 or 20, I think it was 1920 to 1939, actually. People were starving en masse, like 40% of the peasants, I would guess. I once estimated. 95% of the Jews were poor, so maybe not 95% of Jews were starving, eating like potato peel soup every night, but probably more than white Russian peasants. The Jews in Belarus were starving because they couldn't own land. So what? But, the Jews, my people were, at that time, especially marginalized but messianic, highly educated in comparison to everyone else, fanatical, and also violent. If you look at Herschel Kert or Sholem Schwarzbart, they were Nakems. They were basically like Hamas today, or like the PFLP, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, Leila Khalid, I think her name was. They would fucking shoot their oppressors directly, themselves, DIY. They're revered. Those two have been revered historically, especially Schwarzbart, because he wanted to go to Israel and, whatever. So, but also, in 1936, In my family's other town of Snov, Belarus, like basically the heart of Belarus geographically, and you could even say spiritually in terms of, there's still a collective there. Or, whatever, I think it's technically, no, it's not privatized, I don't think. It's still, basically it's almost a collective, Agri-Kombinat, Snov. But when it was occupied by the Poles from Warsaw, the special units of the NKVD, the Soviet Border Guards unit, came over at night, arrested whole Polish occupier families, marched them to the forest, and shot them into pits, including the children of these, scumbags, occupiers. I'll just mention briefly, 1939, when our lands were liberated under Molotov-Ribbentrop Non-Aggression Pact, ironically, I suppose, the Komsomol, when the comrades came from Moscow to organize a communist youth league in Baranovich, or Baranovichi, they call it now, the 80% of the signups were Jewish youth. That's how, messianic, let's call them, and political the Jews were. Jewish youth before that, during, the 1905 revolution in Pinsk, I was reading, before it was disappeared either inadvertently or on purpose, but in 1905, Jewish youth would shoot at Zionist factory owners and cops and the chief of police in Pinsk. And I'm sure that happened all over. There were 17,000 17,000 Tsarist officials. I think it was roughly 1880 to 1917, the revolution. They were shot and killed. Not just by Jews, but, Russian youth, probably Lettish youth, Latvian youth, etc. And, if you were bourgeois, if you believed in oppressing the Arabs, or, more immediately oppressing Jewish youth by not hiring them in your factory, even though you were a Jew, because the Jewish youth were basically socialists and revolutionaries and would organize unions and strikes, they shot you. That was the reality. And what else? The week of September 17th, 1939, the Red Army allowed a jacquerie, mostly of the peasants, but, Jewish youth flocked to the people's militias, the initial revolutionary paramilitary bodies that carried out repressions against the bourgeoisie in these towns, against the Polish occupiers, non-coms, military, border guards, foresters, I guess, who would snitch on peasants trying to gather firewood or hunt animals, or, because the peasants, again, were starving, and probably, maybe, who knows, 60, 80% of the Jews were starving. I'm just, taking a wild ass guess, but, you don't have land to grow food. You're in a bad situation, and you're under the occupation of Warsaw, and there's mass unemployment, and you can't sell your goods in the ghetto. You're even worse off than the peasants probably. So yeah, the first week of the liberation in 1939 September, it was brutal. I mean, they castrated people. They beat them half to death with shovels, to death if they were lucky. If they were unlucky, they beat them within an inch of their life, and then they buried them alive. All right? They came at, especially the peasants, but, the peasants would come at some of these people. I think it was in the hundreds. The killings were, numbering the hundreds, all throughout the old Pale of Settlement, not just Belarus. But they did it with agricultural implements in the villages, and it was brutal, like OUN type of shit, or Holocaust, what the Zionists claim, the fascists, or they say the Germans, did to the Jews, kind of ahistorically, but. But there was brutal killing. Now, there was a lot less killing because there are a lot fewer, Polish occupiers than there were Jews or native peasants who would resist, after when the war happened and the genocide happened. But still, so, now the imperialists are trying to, crank up propaganda, and I guess, people aren't really buying it, at least in Western Europe, from what I just read. Excuse me. But the imperialists, it's the old playbook. Oh, the Palestinians, they're murdering babies or raping women or this, that, and the other. Well, it turns out, most of that is debunked, and it's just, what do they call it? Yellow press propaganda. But even to the extent it might be true, this is what happens, in occupied Western Bielorussian Soviet Socialist Republic, when you're a Polish occupier for 20 years, starving the peasants, starving the Jews, setting up the Jews for genocide, blocking any sort of political representation of the people, etc. Keeping the country just retarded politically. The Zionists are doing the same thing to the Palestinians today. And, with all the propaganda, it's so much work to get through that and to try to dig back. I had to interrogate, various intellectuals and officials. And, a lot of them talk out their ass. They don't know the answer or they lie. And, they want to ingratiate themselves with the imperialists, or they don't want to piss off, someone in the bureaucracy or the government where they are. So, they don't really tell you the truth. But, I guess, I just get tired. And then, for months and years, I'm just like, oh, God, what's the use? Well, thank you, Palestinian people, for stimulating me again to go Google again. And, I got more, very good information in the last week, about the real situation, objectively, of the Jews, 80, 100 years ago, but still. But anyway, so the point is what? What's the situation in Gaza and Palestine? Well, go listen to, I think the best kind of rundown I've heard is Max Blumenthal from the Gray Zone. He talks about, massive depression and oppression and poverty, people not being able to work to, fulfill themselves. They don't even have clean drinking water, like 90, what the heck was it? Like 97 or 99% of their water is polluted, the water that they're drinking. Or I don't know, maybe, a lot of it too comes from outside, but still, I can tell you, like if I drink water over in the former Soviet Union and it's not, like my system's not used to it, that's debilitating. That's really debilitating. That's the most important thing when you're alive is clean water. I mean, even before appetizing food, or, okay, the weather there is warmer, but still it gets cold enough in the winter. Excuse me, but water, that is, you don't realize how important it is until you've had some bad water and you get the shits like all day or for 3 days and you're just run down. Imagine living like that. And you're like, what is it, 21? Or you're my age, 55? That's literally almost unlivable like that. And this is what the Zionist freaks, they're doing this on purpose. And all these fucking scumbags in Israel, they're like scumbags here in America, but worse, because they've what? It's such an ongoing issue that you have to really, I won't say make an effort, but make an effort not to look at what's happening to your neighbors. These people are like, Israel is the size of the state of New Jersey. You can't, sure, people can like ignore stuff, but on a certain level, it's like the Germans with like the communists and the Jews during the war. People would say, well, yeah, we kind of knew bad things were happening, right? So, and, you get these flare-ups year after year after year, and you choose to ignore them or rationalize them. And, then the Palestinians come and they gun you down, especially the settlers. I'm not going to feel sorry for you. You're just like the fucking Osadniki, the Polish occupiers. The more dead Zionists, the better. Okay, maybe the babies, or maybe someone who hasn't reached bar mitzvah age, who can't take full responsibility for themselves. But, if you grow up in a situation that is that blatant, the scumbags at the top, these CIA fucks or Mossad fucks or Histadrut fucks, they lie out their ass 24/7 about the history of our people, about what, basically about the history of our people, the history of the Palestinians even, but especially the history of the Jews. Well, but still, you must have had a grandmother. I've heard stories where people are like, oh, my grandmother said they were oppressed this way, that way, in 10 different ways. And, it was the Nazis doing this, or the, more infrequently, the Polish occupiers or the Polish nationalists were doing this. If you can't put two and two together, like oppressing the Palestinians like this, treating them like animals, imprisoning them, stealing their land, murdering them indiscriminately, murdering children, dropping bombs in populated areas. If you let this go on, you throw a party while the bombs are being dropped, like last time or the time before, I'm cheering on the Palestinians to shoot you. Any normal person is going to say, good, give them what they deserve. So, anyway, anything else? Yeah, I guess, how many minutes? 30 minutes. Okay, let me try to wrap this up. So then October 30th and 31st, that is, what's today? I can't see too well anymore. It's going on the 15th tomorrow. So like 2 weeks from now is the 82nd, what is that? I think it's the 82nd anniversary, of, practically my whole family was murdered by basically the capitalists. The capitalists sent the Nazis subcontracted mostly Baltic filth, Chads and Karens, like these fucksticks who get shot last week by the Palestinian resistance. That couple, they had a couple babies. Oh, well, I don't feel sorry for them. Because those are the same kind of fucksticks in Lithuania that signed up for the SS and shot my people. So basically, you're the analog. You're the Jewish fascist, settler, oppressing and murdering Palestinians, allowing that to continue, actively, very actively. They're very aggressive in Israel, especially in the settlements. And, I'm happy. I had a beer. I toasted your death. Just like I toasted the fucking deaths of the Assadniks at Katyn. Great. The world is less shitty now. You're dead. But anyway, so, practically my whole family was basically fucking exterminated. 2 weeks from now, 82 years ago. My father's lifetime. My father was like 14 when they were all fucking gunned down, right? He would have been gunned down as well had he been living over there and not born over here in 23, I think it was. So, 100 years ago. So, what? And then 9 months after, I think it was, July 21st, 1942, the first ghetto rebellion ever among the Jews in the modern period was organized on my family's block in Neshwis, you could say occupied Soviet Belarus. And I learned later on, when I visited Belarus, years after I was born, after everyone else practically, I think, was dead, of my father's family generation, father's generation, that I had a cousin Taiba, and her name was Kantrowitz, the same as mine. And she was a pharmacist, and she was in that concentration extermination camp, just like Gaza. And when the fascists came and said, we're going to murder the rest of you except for a handful, they said, fuck you. And they opened up on these fucking, animal filth with a machine gun, with rebar, with knives, with Molotov cocktails. And they killed about, 36 of these fucks. And then 750 Jews, including my cousin Taiba, were basically murdered in the first ghetto uprising. Again, on my family's block. And that was organized by the Zionists, by the way, because all the better Jews, the communists, had been murdered or evacuated by that time. So, so basically, for me, this Palestinian uprising, this Warsaw Ghetto uprising, or this Neshwis Ghetto uprising, is poetic that it happens in October, so close to the anniversary of my people's extermination. And fuck the Zionists, kill them. They're traitors to the memory of our people, who are mostly fucking communists. So you can shove that up your ass, fucking Anthony Blinken and all you other fucking filthy Jews with money. Especially in the fucking West. Fuck all of you. And then in 2019, I went back again to Russia after my immediate family was almost all dead. And I was able to finally, with the help of comrades and the archives in Moscow, thanks to the workers of the archives of Moscow, was able to track down my surviving family, who was not murdered, my cousin Ita Altarovna Gurevich had married Mikhail Gurevich, and he was in the Red Army lieutenant. She was a cute girl from Neshwis. They went back to Moscow, and then a year and 6 months later, I think it was, or maybe 1940, January, I believe. So 1941, 18 months later, I believe. Everyone in her family, our family, was murdered, back in Neshwis, in Snov. So she attempted to contact my grandmother, and my grandmother could never tell the rest of the family. The family basically was, significant parts of it. My uncle, my father were CIA, OSS, fucked up, but especially the CIA part, and other relatives were our CIA in the West. So I found this family, and the irony is that family, a number of them are, basically previously KGB, now FSB. So whatever, FBI, CIA of Russia, Soviet Union. Basically intellectual Jews, who were militant and security-minded on both sides of the world, ended up going into the intelligence paramilitary services or police services. So, that's basically my family on both sides of the world, and myself as well. But, I'm just waiting for the collapse of the bourgeois order to, conduct my militance. I'm not looking to do it under any capitalist. So at any rate, though, as I mentioned in the beginning, of course, when I went under the knife, President Putin was kind enough to commence a special operation, punch the Western traitors, the murderers in the face, and that sparked off the rest of the world basically telling the West to go fuck itself, which is beautiful. And, that leads around to, as Rabbi Michael Lerner ironically might say, Tikkun Olam, or the healing of the world, through the world resisting the Western imperialist traitors. And that's my hope for Palestine, and I think the Palestinian hope for Palestine as well, that, hopefully in the short term, it's looking like Syria and under Assad, and Lebanon under Hezbollah, backed by Iran, is attacking, the Zionists and the state of Israel, which the Zionists lead. And, that will, thanks to Lenin, help, come to the aid of the Palestinian people, unlike, the Jews, the real Jews, not these, insane, these freaks in the Middle East, at the beck and call of the imperialists, but, unlike the real Jews who were, either communists or sympathetic to the Soviet Union, which is why they were wiped out, that, now the imperialists are weakening and the East is getting stronger. And because of the situation of asymmetric warfare, I expect that, basically the imperialists are trying to fight on the home turf of the Arab peoples. And, I'm going to be so happy to see them get their asses thrashed. So, victory to the Palestinian people and the people of Lebanon and Syria, and crush the imperialists.